Hi, I'm Matthew Corp, and this is the assignment 2 for Accounting 341, Public Accounting and Finance. This assignment is based on the executive branch of government. Firstly, I'll start off with a small introduction by going briefly over what exactly the executive is and what role they play in New Zealand. The executive comprises of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the public sector. And in extension to this, the Cabinet comprises of ministers who are members of the governing party. A responsible Cabinet Minister holds a specific department and is accountable for certain types of performance within that department. Along with this, the executive is also responsible for keeping the public entities accountable to the laws made under the legislator. Later on in the presentation, I will delve deeper into the chains of responsibility and accountability. But for now, I will just say that the executive are also responsible and accountable to the Parliament, as well as amongst themselves. As a group, the executive has a number of roles, such as estimating revenues and expenditure and submitting accounts to Controller and Auditor General for audit. Over the course of this presentation, I will cover a few of the specific roles. I will be looking at responsibility and accountability, taxation and appropriation planning, and financial and performance accounting. The issue I'll be covering in this presentation is whether or not changes within the public health sector are justified when taking into account the adjustment in accountability. Further, I'll be looking into how this adjustment in accountability affects the other important aspects, which are financial and performance accounting and taxation and appropriation planning. I've chosen this issue as accountability in my personal view and through the knowledge gained over the past few weeks as an extremely important issue within the executive. Along with this, it encompasses the other important aspects and works alongside them most, if not all, of the time. I've chosen to look at the public health sector specifically as, through my further research over the past few weeks, I've found numerous reports and articles that relate to the learning and aspects involved in class and this assignment. Alongside this, it gives a practical insight into the workings of public sector and is a topic that I think people can relate to or understand, and it isn't too abstract. Accountability has been described as being a nebulous concept. This means that it is lacking of definite form or description and is often easier to identify when it is absent rather than present. However, in saying that, the chains of responsibility and accountability are extremely important in the functions of the executive and the ministries associated. Within the public sector management system, there are a number of accountability relationships. The executive has an accountability relationship with Parliament. More specifically, within the executive, there are relationships between the individual ministers and the Cabinet, which is the ministers collectively, as well as departmental chief executives and their ministers. Looking first at hierarchical accountability and then holistic accountability, I will give an overview and then compare the two. Usually, hierarchical accountability is formed from contractual relationships. This means that superiors are in control of their subordinates by requiring them to discharge their accepted responsibilities and report on their performance. This form of accountability causes the subordinate to be capped as to how much power they can have and are also limited by the superior's controlling actions. The relationship is described as being from the subordinate acceptor to the superior delegator, and accountability is upwards to the funder. Now looking at holistic accountability is something different. This concept of accountability looks at it in not just an upward motion, but in a downward and sideways motion as well. In more detail, this means that all of the parties or groups share the same values and are in mutual trust and have mutual respect for one another. In contrast to hierarchical accountability, holistic accountability involves all of the stakeholders. Rather than just the significant funder, all of the stakeholders are involved in agreement of values. Applying accountability to the taxation and appropriation aspect is a rather straightforward but crucial part. When looking at the appropriation of funds, it needs to be considered how these funds are obtained. This is where taxation and appropriation meet. Taxation is the major source of revenue for the Crown. This is taken from the public in the form of income taxes as well as goods and services taxes. These taxes are then paid to the Inland Revenue, who in turn passes them to the government. The government then will pass the revenue on to the Treasury, who, according to the budgeting plan, will disperse the funds to the appropriate ministries. Responsibility and accountability fit into the mix as the executive, formed with the ministers, are responsible for their government department. This also joins with the financial and performance accounting of the executive. Financial and performance accounting comprises of a number of things. 1. Budget-related reports, as well as statements of financial position, as well as department and sub-department reports, to name a few. The financial reports that are created refer to the going-ons of the ministries. These financial reports and performance reviews aim to inform the public how the executive branch is performing. This is where the financial and performance accounting join with responsibility and accountability. I will now move on to relating the previous points I've made about taxation and appropriation planning, along with financial and performance accounting and the chains of responsibility and accountability to the public health sector. I will also be describing how the changes of form of accountability will affect the various aspects I've talked about. A common measure of performance for ministers is the outputs of their department. That is, how well they are performing and meeting the required results that the government has put in place for them. According to the Statistic New Zealand website, the output for the health sector in New Zealand is a whole course of treatment for a particular condition or disease, rather than the individual activities that make up each treatment. There is a focus on this output, as they provide a reliable basis for enforcing accountability in the managerial form. Relating the previous discussion on hierarchical accountability and holistic accountability to the health system is my next step. Hierarchical accountability works on the relationship sense that the accountability is from the provider of primary healthcare to the funder, whereas holistic accountability works on the relationship from the provider of the healthcare to the stakeholders. The difference here between the forms of accountability have effects on the type of reporting that is done. This is the financial and performance accounting side of the changes. The nature of reporting when looking at the hierarchical accountability uses funding and outputs achieved. Usually this form of reporting was quantitative. However, when there is a holistic accountability, the long-term impact on society was addressed, and it was also key to mention that the reporting was tailored to meet the needs of the individual stakeholders. Looking into the reporting further, changes can be seen. With a hierarchical accountability, that is an upward direction to the District Health Board and the Ministry of Health, who in turn will have to report to their Minister, who reports to the Executive. The contractual reports include 6 monthly non-financial reports of progress, response to service audits as required, and the annual report was audited. When looking at the holistic accountability, the reports were made to different areas, that is, upwards again to the district health boards and so on, as I've just mentioned, alongside downwards to the community and patients, as well as sideways. And each of these reports were specific to the recipient. Whilst looking at prior research and what I have learned from my discussions, I found that the changes of accountability do not make an overall change to the specific, or some might say, important reports that the executive requires. However, it is clear to see that no matter what form of accountability is used, it relates to the different aspects as well as the executive. All of these parts of the executive branch of government interlock, and they form an integral part of the government and the executive, all the way from the top executive to the bottom. Thank you.